Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Hi, and welcome to the 10-Minute Food Truck Training Podcast. My name is Bill Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the National Street Food Vendors Association, which is a nonprofit dedicated to education, advocacy, and uplifting all food vendors. Today, we're going to be talking about tipping, how it's become complicated, and how it is also facing a lot of fatigue. But before we get into that, I'll remind you guys I'm going to be in Edison, New Jersey as a part of the Food Truck Owners Expo. That's going to be December 2nd and 3rd of 2025. I'll be giving 2 classes. Once the educational component is concluded, each of those 2 days, I'll be out on the main expo floor in my National Street Food Vendors Association booth where you guys can join me, share your success. You can ask questions about the industry and just hang out with us and have a great time. Again, Edison, New Jersey, December 2nd and 3rd of 2025. Go to FTOexpo.com, place your order for the tickets today. When you do, put in the code FTTG15 for a 15% discount. So let's talk about tipping. Why does tipping seem so complicated today? Why is it so exhausting for so many people? Why do we even tip in the first place? How do we get to the point where you're asked to leave 20% for going to a coffee shop and you walk up to the counter and the dude wants 20% just for having poured coffee into a cup? How about the gas station? You're the one that pumped the gas. You're the one that has to walk inside to pay for it. And when you pay for it with a card, there is what? A 20% tip request. Why is that happening? People are getting what's being known as tip fatigue. You have somebody come to your house to work on your pipes as a plumber. He wants a tip. Somebody works on your AC. They want a tip. Everybody has an automatic way to do tipping just because the POS system will let you. So let's look at some history. Tipping was not something that just has been in our country forever. It actually was imported from Europe. In the 1800s, most people in the U.S. thought that tipping was un-American. They called it undemocratic. It's anti-capitalist. It is not a way to uplift anyone. It was something that was imported from Europe. It was class stratification. The well-to-do people love to brag about, well, I tipped this person because I'm rich and they're not. It was not a way to help the people that weren't making a lot of money. It was a way for the tipper to brag to their friends about how much money they're able to tip. Just bragging rights. It's all that it was. They didn't care not one bit about the person receiving the tip. So when did tipping become such a big thing? Well, I've said this before. After the Civil War, once we had all the people that were previously slaves being released into the workforce, most businesses, especially in the South, did not want to pay them. And if they did pay them, it was very, very little. So for example, someone that would pick up your luggage, put it on the train, and then ride with you and serve you on the train, and then get the luggage off the train for you and hand it to you, that was called a porter. That person made very, very little. They depended upon tips to be able to survive. So for example, in 1915, a Pullman porter working on the railroads earned $27.50 a month. If they weren't tipped, that $27.50 wouldn't last. So what does that $27.50 equate to in today's money? Roughly $900. Now, could you live on $900 in 2025? That's what the buying power was. So they had to rely on tips. Can you imagine having to make up that much money in tips? Just think about your bills right now. Would $900 cover it? How would you feel every day knowing you had to make so much money in tips? And remember, that was for somebody doing very menial labor. So if you go back and look at some other jobs, just to compare, in 1915, that Pullman porter making less than $1 a day, again, $27.50 for 30 days. Most factory workers or just railroad laborers were making 2 to 3 times as much. So you bring that forward to 2025. If you're making 3 times as much money, now you're at $2,700 a month. Okay, now you can at least live somewhere. So again, tipping was done for the menial laborers, the ones that had low skill sets and low education. What has changed from 1915 to 2025? Well, there's been a couple of other little historical things you got to be made aware of, that the government decided that they know better. There's a law that was created called the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it created a federal minimum wage. But guess what? Restaurants weren't included. They didn't care about restaurant workers at all. So they still had to depend upon tips because they weren't even forced to pay a minimum wage. But then the Democratic Congress with a Democratic president in 1966 decided that they were going to change the minimum wage protections and add on restaurant workers. But they didn't fully do it. Sounds like progress, doesn't it? Congress, again, a Democratic Congress with a Democratic president, built in a very sad loophole. Employers were allowed to count tips towards the minimum wage. This became known as a tip credit. That's why it's so ingrained now when you go to a sit-down restaurant. The server wants, back then, 10%, now it's 20%. It's not because they think they're awesome, it's because they need that just to get themselves back to minimum wage. It's a tip credit. So those fancy restaurants where you're paying $60, $70 for a meal, they're paying their server $2.13, or whatever the minimum is, sub-minimum is in that state. So those servers depend upon your tips. Now, we don't do that in food trucks. We don't pay sub-minimum, but yet we expect tips. Now, remember, I'm talking about 1966, and they created that sub-minimum wage. Now, you want to hear something really, really sad? Let's fast forward from 1966 to 1990. The sub-minimum wage was frozen at $2.13, and it's still $2.13 today. So 35 years later, the same wage. Tipped workers in many states around the U.S. are paid $2.13. They depend upon tips. Now, there are some states where sub-minimum is not allowed. California, Washington, Nevada, for example. All of those states require the full minimum wage to be paid, and then tips are on top. Does that sound fair to you at all? You go to work in Arizona, you can be paid $2.13. Go right across the border into California or Nevada, and you're paid whatever the state minimum wage is, and still expected to tip. So why are we talking about tips? What does it do to your food truck? Tips are free money, right? No, they're not. The IRS says if you make more than $20 in tips, it must be reported to your employer. Now, you're the boss of the food truck, so you know exactly how much money in tips is going to your employees on the credit cards as well as in cash. And you're responsible to make sure that they report it. And here's the thing that most people don't understand about tips are free money. There's a whole bunch of idiots out there that talk about that. You have to pay the FICA taxes on those tips. As a business, that's the FICA MAT. Tips impact your profitability. Tips are free money. No, they're not. Now, you want to hear something else that's interesting? Talking about tips. The National Restaurant Association. It's the National Restaurant Association. They don't like food trucks. They'll let you pay money to be a part of their association as a food truck, but they don't like food trucks. Food trucks hurt restaurants, that's what they say. They support politicians that put laws into place to make it harder for you as a food truck owner to work. The NRA also defends tips. They like wages being depressed. McDonald's decided that, nope, we're walking away. So earlier in September, McDonald's pulled out of the National Restaurant Association. Now, most people look at McDonald's as being one of the biggest restaurant chains in the U.S., and they are. Numbers-wise, units-wise, sales-wise. They are one of the biggest chains, and they pulled out of the National Restaurant Association over tips. McDonald's calls it an uneven playing field. So McDonald's, remember, they don't have tipped workers. So they're paying full price, whatever their state's minimum wage is. But in many states in the U.S., other restaurants are not paying full minimum wage. I would imagine you are as a food truck owner, but your competitors in certainly sit-down restaurants are not. So McDonald's cares enough to pull out of the NRA. That's a big deal. But what about tipping fatigue? What do guests really think? Because that's what matters to you. History doesn't matter. certainly most people don't care one way or another what happened after the Civil War. They certainly don't care what happened to some porter in 1915. They don't care about what happened in 1966. They don't care about what happened in the 1990s. All they care about is their paycheck today in 2025. So what about tipping fatigue? Tipping is everywhere. You go to, a coffee counter, an airport kiosk where you do everything. They want a tip. Even self-checkouts in some places will have a tip. So you have filled your buggy, you have rung everything up, and they want a tip. For what? Stocking their own shelves? Give me a break. A Pew survey found that 72% of Americans say tipping is expected in more places than it was just 5 years ago. Guests are frustrated. 2/3, so 66% of Americans say businesses rely too much on tips instead of paying better wages. Many feel tipping has shifted from appreciation into being an obligation. And you want to know what's interesting? When guests know workers are already being paid a full wage, the tipping feels less urgent. And that's where tipping fatigue sets in. Guests feel like the pressure has just gone too far. You ever watch somebody who has walked up to your food truck, place an order, you put that stupid screen in front of them that's got 15, 20, 25%, and they hesitate? This is like McDonald's. They're getting paid to cook my food. Why am I tipping them? I had to place the order. I had to stand around and wait. They're not even bringing it to me. They didn't come out to me and take my order. They didn't bring me drinks. All they did was hand me stuff through a window. Just like Wendy's, Burger King, and McDonald's. Do you tip them at the drive-thru? Exact same thing. But you expect people to tip you. I implore you to understand the laws in your state. If you are doing sub-minimum, you probably shouldn't. If you're relying so much on tipping, you probably shouldn't. Pay your team a fair wage. Don't worry about tips, and they shouldn't worry about tips. The bottom line is we are counter service. We are just like McDonald's that pulled out of the National Restaurant Association over tipping. The playing field is not level. You guys are paying, in, I would say 99% of the cases, you guys are paying more than minimum wage in your state and still expecting tips. Why is that? Remember, I've been doing this a very, very long time. Tipping was not something I ever did, ever. And we did all kind of stuff. We did hot dog carts. Didn't expect a tip, didn't have a tip jar out. I know how to do math and I know how to make money on what I sell. So I was never worried about tips. Never, ever. Even when I had employees, they were paid and bonused on the sales of the unit, not the generosity or lack thereof of somebody coming up, oh, give you a tip. You're so cute. I'll give you a tip. Tips are one of the most unfair things out there. There are so many studies that show so many biases on tipping. And the biases can be race. Certain races make less. I know this for a fact. We had servers at one of our sit-down restaurants. We had Asians, we had blacks, we had whites. Even the bad white servers made more money than the Asians or the blacks, even though in many cases the Asians were significantly faster and friendlier. Even the blacks that we had, same deal. Significantly faster and friendlier, but made less tip on the same sales volume. We even saw it with the servers' looks. Pretty servers, what were perceived as pretty servers, made more money than the ones that were older and the ones that wouldn't be considered attractive. So every time you set out a tip jar, every time you set up that prompt, tip me money, you're buying into and supporting a system that is just not fair in any way, shape, or form. And then you're making your guests feel like they're obligated to give you more. Melissa and I went to a restaurant yesterday and we got really, really good food. We paid $60 for it. The reason that number came to my mind as I was paying the bill and put the tip on it, because the server was good, it was the exact same amount of money that we had paid about a month ago at a food truck for less food, not near as good a service, and the food was not good. Talked about it on a podcast. Nationally known food truck company. Overinflated prices, expected to be tipped, and the food wasn't good. And of course, I wouldn't know that until after I've already paid the tip. Had I sampled the food and then been asked to leave a tip, I would not have left a tip. Because the one thing they were expected to do, which is produce delicious food, they failed at. Yeah, tipping counter service makes no sense. Tipping a kiosk makes no sense. And yet people want you to do it. Thank you guys so much for listening to the 10-Minute Food Truck Training Podcast. If you're finding everything helpful that we do, please consider subscribing. If you love what we do, show some support. There's a link in the description to make that happen, and it's not a tip. Thank you guys so much, and you have a profitable week.